right, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like even though you thought the power creep conversation in gacha games was nearing the end of its lifespan, it appears that there is another creator who is putting their take into the arena. None other than Hex Juice herself. Not the crazy cat lady, but the crazy bat lady. And I wanted to take some time to see, this video has actually been well received, I wanted to take some time to see what her points were all about. We've actually got Hex Juice in the chat as well. And so she might be able to provide some additional insight on what some of her points are, if there are any questions.
Hi, besties. As I've been getting back into the gacha space, there's been a big conversation about the concept of power creep. This particular time was about Honkai Star Rail, starting with a tweet by Mr. Pokey, and I was super surprised by how long this discussion went on.
Same. I thought he was just joking at first. I thought that this was like sarcastic and not really real. I thought he was just trolling, but no, he wasn't. Nah, he wasn't. Absolutely not. He was serious about every single thing.
This was certainly not the first time this debate has been brought up, and will definitely not be the last time we have to hear about power creep in gacha games. However, one thing I did notice while watching 15 debates with what felt like 500 different creators is that we all kind of suck at talking about power creep.
Why do you have to say that I suck? It's only been 30 seconds into the video and I've already been personally insulted. SMH. She had to do all of us like that.
Talking about power creep.
Subscribe!
Oh boy. It's been a while since I've seen this one. Been a while since I've seen this one.
While I know this is a little bit late to the party, I wanted to get some more scripting practice in and talk about the concept of power creep, what it is, why it happens, and hopefully get some more of a baseline down for everyone in gacha so that next time this conversation comes up, we can talk about it more effectively. And maybe even finish the debate in 1 or 2 conversations instead of 50 billion.
Well, Hex, that wouldn't be good for content though. We wouldn't be able to farm nearly as much if we had concise, clear points. We got to make sure that everything is as ambiguous as possible so that we can keep making videos on it. That's the content creator way.
We'll start at the most basic question. What is power creep? The Google AI definition, which I think sums it up pretty nicely, is that power creep is the process of making new content in a game more powerful than existing content. This is a phenomenon that happens far beyond gacha games and can be seen in card games like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, and Google AI also says it happens in World of Warcraft, which I don't know anything about, so I'm just kind of taking its word for it. Before we move on, I want to establish that I believe that this definition is an extremely simplified baseline.
Power creep exists because it makes money, the end? True. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? If you're just gonna use something over and over and over and over and over and over, and it will clear everything forever and ever and ever and ever, yeah, you could make the argument that you're not gonna make as much money, right? Because there's no incentive to buy other things. But you can get people to buy things in other ways than just strictly power creeping things. Like Rosia, for example.
And more of a catch-all umbrella term for many things that most people refer to generally as power creep. I also think that this very simplified definition is a primary culprit for why gacha creators aren't the most effective at discussing this topic.
Okay, Fob, why did you have to say this after I said Rosia?
The next question is, why does power creep happen? What many of the games that experience power creep have in common is that they don't have the ability to go back and change old content. In a game like League of Legends or Valorant, character stats can be adjusted and their whole ability kits can be changed to help them keep up with the current state of the meta. However, in a card game like Magic the Gathering, the only change that can be made to a card after being printed is to ban it from play if it's too strong, so power creep happens pretty regularly. This is also true of gacha games. Characters are not typically ever directly changed after release. Because people spend their money and time to get those characters, it's not like the developers can just go back and adjust their stats and abilities willy-nilly.
Well, we do have an example of where this has occurred in Wuthering Waves 2.0, where the esteemed Spectro Rover was given the ability to frazzle their opponents for completely free. They still suck, but yeah, they can do that now.
I believe there might also be laws about this, at least in China, where a lot of gacha game developers are based. But at the end of the day, the point is that retroactively changing characters directly is typically not done in gacha games.
I was just baiting Sarah and Hex with that one because I know every time somebody talks shit about Spectro Rover, Sarah will like come into the chat and be like,
No, they don't. They don't suck. They're actually really good. Check out my 3-star clear.
The only example I can personally think of are the Geo and Zhongli changes that happened in Genshin Impact, though I'm pretty sure there are others that y'all could share. Since characters are not changed after release, the only way a character can be buffed or nerfed is indirectly through the release of new units, new mechanics, new enemies, and bosses. For example, if your character is a water-type DPS character that has maybe an average level of power, it can be indirectly buffed to the top of the meta if the game releases a powerful new support for water-type DPSs. It can also be nerfed if the current
True.
endgame content has bosses that are resistant to water-type damage. I want to be
True.
clear here. Power creep is 100% inevitable in gacha games.
It's kind of like how Jinsei sucked balls for like one patch because the middle bosses were the Ikes and the Fallacy of No Return. Or it was like the Fallacy of No Return and Scar. And so you couldn't really use her in the middle tower. Otherwise, she was just absolute poo-poo. Yeah, that was a fun patch. A lot of skill issues were exposed in that patch. All those players who had been only using Jinsei, for like 2 months, suddenly had no idea how to clear the tower because they had to play a character that didn't play themselves. Yeah, I remember that one. That was a fun time. That was a goofy time, to be honest. I can't just grapple and spam the mouse button? Oh my god, this combat is so hard.
These are live service games that make money off of releasing new characters, and many gacha games incentivize players to pull on those characters by specifically catering endgame content to the most recently released unit. We have to
True,
remember that at
blessings.
base, gacha games
Buffs,
are
nerfs.
designed to be predatory, and they try to incentivize people to indulge in the gacha system, which is essentially gambling. Then what's the problem with power creep if every game does it and it's inherently part of gacha game design?
How much you power creep? That's the fucking problem. Or I hope we're gonna get there. Maybe spoiler warning for the rest of the vid.
You might ask. The problem is that not every form of power creep is created equal, and some power creep is done intentionally by gacha developers as a predatory practice to put pressure on players to pull characters. Here is the first distinction I want to make regarding power creep in gacha. As I've mentioned
Let's
before,
hear that first
power creep
distinction.
can occur by 2 primary functions in single-player gacha games. Please note that I'm not really speaking on PvP gachas because the only one I've ever played is Koki Run Kingdom, and I didn't really get into that part of the game. So the first function is via the characters directly, and the second is by the environment in which you play those characters. This includes the enemies, bosses, battle mechanics, and more that can be introduced into the game by the devs. I'm going to call these internal and external power creep respectively. My personal opinion is that internal power creep via characters being released is absolutely a given in gacha games, and external power creep is the much trickier version that devs often tend to use to be more predatory than average. Also, if there are any actual terms already for these concepts, please let me know. I'm just kind of making up as I go along here.
Okay, Vars. Vars in one of his videos made up like a lot of random terms that have never been used in Wuwa before. I think he's walked them back, so no problem at all. It's just a funny reference. I actually think that there's a take here that I actually disagree with. I honestly feel like internal power creep, at least from the way that you described it, is a little bit worse than external. From the perspective of external can always just be something that players can typically actively work around by changing up their roster or changing up their teams. It's more of like a challenge to overcome versus like internal kind of just feels like more permanent to me. And when I see like a character like Acheron or Firefly compared to like Jing Liu or Blade, I'm like, okay, well, this is just like something that's permanent in the game that can never really be adjusted anymore. And now the damage ceiling has been raised to a crazy level. And in external, hey, you can't nerf or buff the characters without legal problems, but you can nerf or buff the bosses. No problem at all. They nerfed Scar. They nerfed Scar in Wuthering Waves because he was too challenging to fight against for some people. That was like external power creep, right? Where certain characters are better against Scar than others. And then they just nerfed the boss and then it got deleted from the game, right? That's why I think external is actually a lot better than internal. That's my point of view on it, at least from the definitions that I'm hearing over here.
The next distinction I'd like to make is one that was actually brought up to me on Twitter, and I think it's super valuable. This is the chart that was provided, and I don't really know who made this originally, but thanks for the info from this very fine Twitter denizen. So now we have 2 more distinctions, which are absolute power creep and relative power creep. If you want to really simplify it down, these are more or less bad power creep and good, or at least neutral power creep. With absolute power creep, a new, stronger unit is directly stronger than old units as a core part of its design. The unit makes older units completely obsolete, thereby devaluing the investments by players into those characters.
It depends if the enemies are hyper-specific to particular mechanics. Well, this was the thing. Scar, prior to him being nerfed, was hyper-specific to having teams that could spam Concerto. Characters like Yang Yang, Sanhua, and Verena were very, very good against him because you would be able to spam intros to break his stagger bar and actually make him vulnerable during the fight. Versus if you had teams that were, yeah, you weren't playing. Yeah, you weren't playing during the time. But yeah, they just changed his break bar completely to make it more vulnerable. They added more parryable attacks to him as well. And it sort of just like changed the gameplay dynamic completely when fighting him to just not require as much of that Concerto generation to make the fight easier. So they kind of like, it was a straight up nerf overall, but it made him just more accessible to a wider variety of teams. Trying to use dot team in a break MOC, yeah, that's just like, HSR's a lot more on the nose, right? And Genshin's a lot more on the nose as well, where they'll have like, the fact that you have to use the same team in Genshin for 3 different fights is disgusting. Now that I've like experienced it, where it's like, just because one of the fights is off element for one character on your team, even though the other 2 fights are on element and fine for them, you still can't use the character in Genshin's Abyss. That's something that's like actually so disgusting about the design that I'm surprised more people don't talk about, is the fact that, yeah, on floor 12, that one team is locked in for 3 fucking fights. And if there's one fight in there that your DPS is not able to be used in, you just can't use the DPS. And it's so much more restrictive. And yeah, that's obviously like the whole external power creep angle as well, right?
And good, or at least neutral power creep. With absolute power creep, a new stronger unit is directly stronger than old units as a core part of its design. The unit makes older units completely obsolete, thereby devaluing the investments by players into those characters.
Acheron and Sela. HSR is majority external. Come on, Sarah. Even you know that's not true. They literally binned Sparkle within 7 months by internally power creeping her with Sunday. They internally power creeped with mechanics like Super Break, mechanics like follow-up attack that function regardless of what the external situations are. Where FUA is usable in an AoE-based MOC and will clear better or at the same rate as AoE-focused teams. That is internal power creep that is so strong that it disregards any sort of external power creep in the game, at least by these definitions.
Absolute power creep also has a negative impact on the game state as a whole.
Negative edge.
Due to the newer unit being so objectively stronger, it discourages variety in gameplay and makes the meta of the game overall much more simple and much more specific.
Isn't that crazy that we were just talking about follow-up attacks and Super Break? Interesting.
It's due to the negative side effects of absolute power creep that I'm terming it bad power creep. With relative power creep, while the character might be stronger than other units, it still allows older units to be played relatively easily. The new character introduces mechanics or synergies that encourage players to create many strategies to complete content, and older units retain value even if they aren't as strong as the power creeping unit. Since relative power creep enhances the game by introducing more complex strategies and a richer environment for the meta, I'm going to be calling it good power creep.
We got Nightmare Echoes. We got Shorekeeper. You can say Shorekeeper power creeped Baija. Yeah, but all Shorekeeper did was make more characters more viable. All Shorekeeper did was close the gap between hypercarry teams and quick swap. All Shorekeeper did was allow for certain builds like going crit damage forecast when you would normally do crit rate by making up for the thing. Gave more build variety. Yeah, that's good power creep. That, and you should expect the fucking 4-star sustainer to be power crept. You would expect that the 5-star limited support is better than Baija. And if you didn't, well, you're stupid, frankly. If you thought Shorekeeper wasn't going to be better than Baija, I think that's just being disingenuous at this point.
This is why I said that power creep is an umbrella term that is used as a catch-all for many things in the gacha community. When we talk about power creep in a gacha game, what do we mean? Do we mean internal power creep or external power creep? Absolute or relative? If we can't make these distinctions,
Baija's still
it's
usable
really
for sure.
Easy to flatten down these conversations. After all, if power creep happens in every gacha game, does that mean it's fine? Why are you tourists complaining about it? You clearly don't even understand what a gacha game is if you're complaining about power creep. You're just stupid and lazy.
Yeah, guys. I can't talk about power creep in HSR because I didn't play the game for 8 months. Despite the fact that I didn't play the game for 8 months because all my characters got power crept and I didn't want to play anymore.
You're just stupid and lazy. But that's the thing. Power creep is a fine line, a razor's edge that gacha developers walk very intentionally to keep their games making money and retaining relevancy. In most gacha games, standard banner characters are power crept relatively quickly. since they can usually be obtained over time as you pull for units and lose
Yep.
50/50s.
That's why I say Calcaro being power crept by Zhang Liao is like a non-factor, because A, Zhang Liao was free, and second, Calcaro is a fucking standard unit, and again, the limited unit has to be better than the standard unit in most situations. And it does turn out that Calcaro can do more damage than Zhang Liao if played like a sweat. So it's like, okay, right? Like it's like, okay, it's still fine.
The dev doesn't want you to be perfectly satisfied with the performance of those free or cheaper units because they want you to pull for new premium characters.
Except S2 Varina. Like, S2 Varina is so disgustingly strong, I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like I'm cheating when I use that character.
But that doesn't mean those characters are unusably bad in all of those games. If a dev really wants to push you to pull a character, that unit will usually be relatively strong and power creep other units. They'll add mechanics in the endgame content that caters to the specialty of that character very specifically, and they'll also probably do some really sweet marketing and trailers to get you emotionally invested in the character. I want to give an example of what I feel was a positive instance of power creep. Sometimes devs want to shake up the meta due to its becoming stale or incentivize players to pull in a type of unit that isn't very popular. An
Good
example
power
of this
creep.
is in Inazuma with Genshin Impact. There was an insane shield meta at the time because Zhongli was so incredibly strong, which made most healing characters effectively useless. After all, why heal something when you could just not take any damage?
You forgot the part about not being staggered either. Because my oh my, if you took no damage but still got staggered, I think it would have been a fine trade-off. But the fact that you can just ignore staggers too and just sit there and like fucking spam the attack button in your entire moveset and just not give a shit was kind of like the big issue with Zhongli. I think the stagger resistance was more important than the shielding because you literally would just ignore what the enemy was doing straight up.
So, Hoyo introduced these fuck-ass dogs that would damage you even through a shield and made healers a lot more useful. This was a form of external power creep and internal power creep, as they also released Kokomi, a very powerful healer, at the same time. Personally though, I just continued to play with Zhongli and my C6 Diona and did enough damage fast enough that I could still complete Spiral Abyss. Zhongli was also still very useful,
use your
and I
Hu Tao.
believe he's still considered strong even now, 4 years later. Personally, I thought this was a good power creep situation because it created more complexity in the meta. Before then, it was just use shield Unga Bunga. Now, you had more viable characters to play and could still use your Unga Bunga shield as long as you didn't get hit by the dog's dot effect or bleed out before finishing the floor of the abyss.
I would actually toss another Genshin example in here that I think was actually a little bit more interesting. And that's Farina. Not Farina, Farina, the Hydro Archon thingy. Because she required you to have team-wide healing slotted in to access her massive damage buffs. And that added a lot. I think it added even more variety than the Rift Hounds, right? Because you talked about how you just did enough damage, you could clear the Rift Hounds regardless. Farina gave you an absurd upside for having healing on your team. And that alone is something that brought Zhongli out of the meta to some degree, or at least put more healers way higher up in the meta. Like, even like Barbara and fucking Jean, right? Some of the oldest characters in the game were being slotted in just to work with Farina. And I honestly think Farina was one of the best examples of character design that Genshin has ever had. And unfortunately, they've only gone downhill ever since Fontaine. Farina was so strong that she would be able to like exclude Bennett from teams as well. Where Bennett's like single target healing wasn't really quite enough to work like that well with her. It worked with like some clunk, but it was way more delayed. And she was strong enough to like warrant benching Bennett and actually playing other team comps, which was great for variety.
Power creep can also be considered good or relative when it can be mitigated by the investment of the players at a reasonable amount. However, there is unfortunately a lot of nuance to this. In many gachas, it is possible to literally play any unit as long as you invest in them extremely heavily, which usually takes several months. Not everyone is going to be particularly incentivized to do this if the investment is higher than the actual benefit of getting to use the character.
Yeah, my E2 blade is dead in a fucking ditch. My E2 blade is dead in a fucking ditch. Yep. Why'd I pull that character? Why did I pull that character?
Usually it's kind of done when people really, really, really like a character. In other games, the power creep gets so severe that older units are almost completely unplayable, no matter the level of investment.
Honkai
I've been
Impact
told
3.
an example of this is
And
Tower of
TOF.
Fantasy, which is pretty well known in the gacha space for having severe power creep, though I'll be honest that I've not played enough of it myself to have personally formed an opinion on this. The problem with investment for players and mitigating power creep is when the amount of investment needed is significantly less for new units than for older units. If you can use a newer unit and instantly blast through endgame content,
The Herda. Hey, I got my free-to-play Bob account, and instead of pulling the newest support, I'm gonna pull the Herda, because it's so fucking broken it works in every single endgame mode, despite being an AoE-focused character. Just get the Herda, ladies and gentlemen, and Honkai Star Rail will become an easy game.
that is a problem with power creep if the older units require you to work months and months and months continuously to keep them viable. Now that we've established the extreme poles of good and bad power creep, we have to think about all of the shades of gray in the middle.
You really had to bring up all the shades of gray in the middle? Get your mind out of the gutter. Get your mind out of the... Your mind was in the gutter when you were scripting this video.
We have to think about all of the shades of gray in the middle. What about a game where the power creep isn't so severe that older units are completely unplayable, but they do require a significantly higher level of investment, even if they're not very old, compared to newer units with more powerful mechanics? In the case where you really want to use a specific character, if the game requires you to get multiple new units to make that older unit even functional, is that a positive example of power creep? Some games release new units extremely rapidly, meaning that power creep is
Like Honkai Star Rail releasing 2 fucking units every patch? Since the game started, 2 units every patch since the game started. Just... You don't have to do that. Because you know what ends up happening when you do that? You end up with shit like Sunday and Sparkle. You end up with shit like Sunday and Sparkle. 2.6 only had Rappa. Okay, I guess. You're right. You're right. They had 1 patch. 1 patch across the entire life cycle of the game. 1 patch.
meaning that power creep is inevitably happening a lot more quickly. And investing in units at a low real-life monetary cost might take longer than the actual amount of time the unit is viable in the meta. Is this beneficial to the player? Manipulative FOMO tactics are common in gacha games. Gacha
It's dog
developers
shit.
are also very aware of the sunken cost fallacy experienced by their players. When power creep is used as a weapon against players, they bank on the fact that players will continue to pull on characters because they've already spent so much time and money on their account and they don't want to feel like they've wasted it. If bad power creep happens once with a particular character or relatively infrequently, it can often be more or less overlooked. When it happens relatively often, it should be looked at with a more critical eye. There is a baseline level of predatory behavior that gacha players have ultimately decided to accept by playing the games. When power creep starts to feel bad for the average player and disincentivizes them from continuing to play or pull for characters, that's a problem.
It is a massive problem in Honkai Star Rail that you're still able to pull characters like Sela, Silverwolf, Blade, and Jing Liu. You might as well just be putting a trapdoor into the game to just brick somebody's account. Like, if you pull on any of those characters in 2025, you're basically just saying, I'm bricking my account. Why is it even in the game at this point? If you pull Ellen, and you know that Miyabi's in the game, you're also just, like, bricking your account. Like, why? The fact that there's this much internal power creep is what the massive fucking problem is. It's the fact that you just are intentionally, if you do decide to pull, fucking yourself. And they put that in the game through the power creep. So it fucks older players and it fucks newer players too by putting in traps that shouldn't be in the game. Just delete them. Just delete Ellen. Just delete Blade. Just delete Jing Liu. Just remove them from the game and refund people at this point. Who cares?
Additionally, because gambling addiction is absolutely a problem in gacha games, even if everyone tries to deny it, there will also be players who are pushed further into their addiction when developers use these practices without caution. Even those who don't struggle specifically with gambling addiction can be pressured into these new units when power creep is too severe.
Yep.
At the end of the day, power creep in gacha is inevitable and can be used as a tool by developers to make the game better, more interesting, and honestly, very engaging to play.
Yeah, like adding Nightmare Echoes. Yep, that was cool. They just buffed every character on the roster instead of power creeping them. They made every other character better by power creeping the equipment. Wow, what a crazy thought. Oh, but Scholar Lost in Erudition makes Jing Liu do 5% more damage. Scholar Lost and Erudition is so good on Jing Liu. Just shut up. It's not the same.
But a screwdriver can be a shiv in the hands of the wrong person, and power creep can also be used as a weapon to squeeze the player base of their time and money. As always, there's personal accountability to know when it's time to stop, and if you're having a hard time resisting the urge to pull in a gacha game,
just quit Honkai Star Rail. You'll literally have no problems. Just quit the game. I'm being genuine. Just quit the game.
it's probably time to take a break and reevaluate. But next time we have the
she basically said the same thing.
Of power creep in gacha games, I'd like to suggest a few questions we can use to guide the conversation. 1. What kind of power creep is occurring? What are we talking about right now? Is it internal or external? Is it absolute or relative? Does this power creep add complexity to the game and its mechanics, or does it make it very simplistic, where it feels like a paint-by-numbers meta where you plug in the right units, even at mediocre investment, to win?
Super Break. It's literally Super Break. I swear to God, somebody needs to make a video on how Super Break ruined Honkai Star Rail. Somebody needs to make a video about why Super Break ruined Honkai Star Rail. Because I swear to God, it did. It fucking did. What a dog shit mechanic.
Is the amount of investment via time, money, whatever, required by players to keep up with the power creep reasonable for players of varying amounts of commitment to the game?
Yeah, just pull every new support, but make sure you don't pull a support like Sparkle. You just need to know that a character like Sunday is going to come out, and just not pull some of the supports, but pull the other ones that are going to be good. That's not reasonable, guys.
While high commitment players will always feel the investment is reasonable, what about average or middle commitment players that often make up the majority of the player base? While there is a normal amount of planning necessary in any gacha game, especially if you're free to play or low cost, does power creep make this amount of planning significantly more time consuming? Can one bad character investment make it feel like your account is set back by several months? Has the power creep in whatever game we're talking about become a pattern over time, rather than something that's a one-off or relatively infrequent? Finally, does the power creep serve the players in any conceivable way, for example, by creating a more diverse meta environment, or does it only serve to make predatory behaviors in the game more intense?
So, I see a post from Sarah over here talking about how Super Break was good because it let more players clear the endgame. They could have also simply just made the endgame easier to clear as well, so that more players cleared it. Like, they didn't have to make the end game go to the point where only one team is super comfortable clearing it, and then the other side is just like fucking literally at war, like fucking doing 8 cycle clears, fucking fighting the hardest battles of their lives, while Super Break is like that Ronaldo vid with like payphone playing in the background, right? You guys know the vid of like stable Ronaldo with payphone in the background. That's literally Super Break, and then the sweaty gamer is like the other side team.
If we can answer these questions first, I genuinely believe we can come to an easier consensus on power creep discussions in the future.
Yeah, Sarah also said it was a double-edged sword, and I think we're feeling the other edge. We're getting negative edged by that other side pretty bad right now.
If everyone comes into them with good faith and with the same goal.
Yeah, the same goal should be shit on Honkai Star Rail unilaterally. That should be the goal. Or at least that's mine when it comes to power creep, because it has the most unmitigated, it has the worst power creep I've ever seen in a gacha game in the past like couple of years. 1000%. It's so bad, it's crazy. I've never seen so many characters devalued and like turned to complete dog shit doo-doo ass water in the span of like 5 months. I've never seen this much like monetary value in like pulls, equipment, eidolons just completely negated and thrown away into the fucking trash. I've never seen that before. I have an E1 Black Swan. I have an E2 Blade. Blade has his light cone. Jing Liu has her light cone. And it's just worthless. It's all fucking worthless. And I'm so confused as to why the devs decided to do that. It's all useless. All of it is useless.
So, there is my power creep yapathon. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something. Let me know what you think down below, and also let me know how you feel about the scripted format for videos. I feel like it's a lot easier to organize my thoughts this way, and I'll probably use it for very specific topics where I have a lot of thoughts, though probably never every video.
I think overall it was a great vid. I think the only thing that would have made it like noticeably better was having a couple more pop-ups while you're talking. While you have kind of like the talking head moment over here, more like pop-ups to give like some more like specific examples of what you're talking about before you get into like the B-rolls. Yeah, more visual examples while you're the talking head. Almost like a newscast anchor, right? But yeah, I think it was great. Let me finish it out.
Anyways, remember, there is more to life than gacha games. Touch grass, brush your teeth, take care of yourself. See y'all later. Bye!
I think overall it was a great vid. The whole new terminology coined, I thought it was very reasonable as well. Nothing too crazy over here. I do think she gave some very, very agreeable definitions and examples and use cases of a lot of the terminology that she put in. The only thing that I think I actually disagreed with Hex on in this vid is that external is worse than internal. I think internal is worse just by nature of it being permanent, and external is something that the devs can change literally at any time. Oh, what the fuck? I'm not subscribed. Might have accidentally unclicked that button. Great vid. Excited to see more of like the scripted format in the future, and ready for the next one, Miss Juice. Let me know what y'all think. Peace out.